Hey guys, in this video, you will learn how to create a realistic metal, such as what you see here. I want you guys to check out the description below and click on the provided link so you can download this file here where I have the Millennia helmet that I have modeled in Blender. And you can follow me step by step on how to create the metal that you see here. Now for this scene, you're going to see that there are three lights. One is going to be at the back of the helmet here, which is going to give the helmet a rim light. So you can see more of the shape of the rim light that separates it from the background. And then you're going to see another light on the left side here, which is going to be illuminating this part of the helmet on the left side. And then here, the third one is going to be illuminating here on the right side. So I got three lights, just basic lighting. It's good to have some basic lighting there before you add your metal texture so you could have a more accurate presentation as you are adjusting your materials. And if I render this out, this is how it looks like right now. We might not stick to the light 100%. We might make a few changes, make it brighter, maybe do some of those things. But overall, it's a nice basic lighting we have so far. Now to start out with our metal, we have to create another view here where we're going to be able to mess around with our shader editor. Let's go ahead and set it to shader editor. And let's go ahead and select one of our meshes here. Let's go to our material and we could create a brand new material. Let's go ahead and rename it right away. Let's call it metal underscore matte. Oops, not at. Matte. Okay. Now we could go ahead and go to our render display. And for this one, we are working with cycles for this project. Now, the first thing we need to do when we're creating our metal is let's go mess around with our principal BSDF here. We want this to look metallic, so we could just crank up our metallic all the way up to 1. And the specular and roughness here is another thing we need to look at. The specular is going to be the overall shininess of the metal. The roughness is how tight the highlights will be. The lower the value, the tighter the highlights will be. The higher the value, the more spread out the highlights will be. In other words, the highlights will be more blurred out. So we could crank up the specularity a little bit more and then bring down our roughness. If you bring down the roughness all the way down, it's going to be more like a chrome type of material. And I don't want it to be like chrome. I want it to be more like a maybe brush metal or maybe cast iron type of fill. All right, so we have the basic metal there. We could apply the same metal that we have here on for the rest of the meshes here. And we can do that by just selecting all of our meshes that we need our metal on. And you could hold the shift key, and the last mesh that you should select is the one that where you already applied the metal. Hold shift and select the last mesh with the metal on. Control L on your keyboard and link materials. Alright, so now if you go ahead and look at all your meshes here, look at your material, you should have everything that you selected here, have that metal material. This one I didn't get to select that, so I'm going to just add the metal material there. And I could go ahead and render this out to see what I'm working with. Alright, so I could see that some of this doesn't have the metal material, so I'm just gonna go ahead and add the metal matte. And also this one doesn't have it. There you go. So I think, yeah, everything already, this one doesn't have it either. So just gonna go, yeah, just double check everything, make sure it has it. There you go. Alright, so everything's all good. We have a basic material there. Of course, we cannot leave it like that. Everything is just too uniform. We are going to be messing around with this. Now, the first thing that we could do for our metal is we could add some dirt accumulating on the edges, which will enhance the shape, enhance the details for our metal. This right here, this material, it looks more like they're trying to go for more of a chrome fill. I'm trying to go, like I said, more of a bronze metal fill or maybe cast iron, but I do like the dirt that I see here around the edges. So to do something like that, we could add a pointiness geometry. Shift A, search, and let's type in geometry node. So plug in, add a geometry node here, and the pointiness is the one that's going to give us the dirt that we need around the edges, okay? And in order for that to work, we have to go ahead and create a color ramp. Shift A, search color ramp right there. And we could plug in the pointiness onto the FAC and the color ramp here onto the base color. And with that said, let's go and see what we have so far by doing that. And it's best to just do a region render so it's not going to take a toll on your system. Control B as in boy, and just go ahead and render this out. Alright, so you don't really see any changes because you got to mess around with the color ramp. Let's go to our swatches here and then just bring this closer together. Bring the swatches closer together, and I think I'm going to go ahead and zoom in so I can see a little better what we're working with. Okay, so this is kind of something that I want. You see the dark tones here that's accumulating on the edges. That's exactly what I want right there. So just really kind of further mess around with it. Look like this one right here doesn't have the metal, so I'm going to go add the metal material there. Yeah, you can see that. Oh, I'm going to go back to my... There you go, back to iOS. Alright, so I think this is... let me see here. Yeah, just kind of mess around with it till you get what you want here. I do want more darker tones around that area. Alright, yeah, maybe something like that. I could really see it enhanced here. Maybe this could be a little bit more enhanced. Yeah, so something like that would be fine. Yeah, I'm okay with this. So I could really see the dark tones around the details here, which is exactly what we're looking for. And if you look at the wing area, this is very nice. You can see the wing here. You can see the edges. What the pointiness does is it creates the color for the color ramp. It finds the edges, the depth of the mesh, and creates the color for the color ramp around those areas where you have the edges and the depth on the meshes. So if we don't have that pointiness geometry, if I unplug it there, you see how it's really plain. So we want to add that there so to give us that nice detail that we need. All right, especially for metal, you're going to see something like this. Now, of course, we don't want to just kind of leave it like this because it looks too clean. So what we're going to be doing is we want to have more control of how we want the color for our black and our white to be. All right, we want to control these. And to do that, we're going to be adding two shaders. One shader is going to control the black part and another shader is going to control the white part. So to do that, let's go ahead and just unplug our color ramp from the base color and unplug our principal BSDF from the material output for now. And we could go ahead and make a copy of this because we're going to need two shaders. Shift D to make a copy. Now, let's go to the first one here and just change this to black. Alright, so this one is going to control this one right here, the black part. And the base color for the second one is going to be white. This is going to control the white one. Now we're going to be adding some noise textures for the base color here, but just so that we don't get confused when you start plugging in this into the mix shader. It's best to kind of understand where they're going. So let's go ahead and create a mix shader. And let's go ahead and mix these two shaders up together. The first one, which is going to control the black one. Let's plug that in on the very first shader here. And then this second one, which is going to control the white one, let's plug that in on the second shader. And then the pointiness geometry that's connected to the color ramp here, let's plug in the color ramp to the FAC. And to be able to see this on the render, we gotta plug in the mix shader onto the surface here. And let's go ahead and check what we're working with here. Control B and alright, so of course nothing has changed because we still have the black color and the white color here, same thing. So what we need to do is we need to rough this up so it's not so clean. We need to add noise texture for both the shaders here for the base color. I'm gonna go ahead and zoom in. I like to zoom in as I add those noise textures. And I'm gonna go ahead. Let's go and deal with the first shader here. Working on our first shader here, let's go ahead and Shift A, add a noise texture. And if we go ahead and plug this in on color onto the base color, and if we go ahead and render this out. Alright, so we don't really, we see that there's some greenish color on there and some pinkish color. If you, by default, the noise texture is more of a rainbow color. So to make this noise texture black and white, we need to add a color ramp, Shift A. And let's go ahead and add a color ramp. Plug that in between the noise texture and the principal BSDF. And let's go ahead and just bring these sliders close together so you could see more. You could see as you bring them together, you could see more of the noise. And if you go back to the noise texture and you crank up the scale, let's say set this to 100, you could see more of the noise. Right now, it looks more like a camouflage type of pattern and it looks too uniform. We need to go ahead and mess around with the other properties for our noise texture. We can crank up the roughness all the way up, and the distortion, we could crank it up to kind of fade out the, just so that we could fade out the roughness to kind of blur it out. Because if you leave it like this, you leave it at this here, it's just not going to look realistic. So we need to definitely fade that out. But I do like how it broke apart the dirt that's accumulating on the edges to give more of the realistic feel. All right, very nice. So it's more broken apart, exactly what we're looking for. All right, you see that? All right. And we could also do the same thing for the second principal BSDF. We could add some breakup on the color. So we could go ahead and you could just go and duplicate this, Shift D to make a copy of that and just bring it here. I'm gonna go ahead and gonna move this, bring this here, and then plug in the color onto the base color. And what we could also do is change how the color look like. So I wanna have more of a brownish feel to the metal. So I'm gonna go to my color here for my second principal BSDF. All right, so with the color ramp here, instead of white, maybe I could change to a different color. I'm gonna set it to more of a brownish color. So I want more of a, or maybe bronze type of color. So I'm gonna go ahead and make it more bronzy. I'm gonna go to HSV and desaturate it slightly, crank it up. Yeah, so maybe something like that. I think I'm gonna desaturate a bit more. All right, yeah, something like that. And I think for the black part, I think the black part here, instead of making it pure black, I'm gonna go ahead and set it to maybe more of a light gray, or maybe a brownish, a dark brown color. So I'm gonna go ahead and set it to more of a dark brown. There you go. Yeah, something like that. And this one, could desaturate it slightly. That's fine. I think this is okay. Yeah, I kind of like that color right there, actually. Yeah. And I think for the distortion, maybe I could crank it up some more to fade it out. All right, so distort it some more. And maybe set it to 120. Distort it. And same for this, maybe I could set it to a higher value. Go. And maybe the detail I could. Also, another thing is if you only leave it at, yeah, I think cranking up the scale would work. But if you want to spread it out some more, I think if you go to the detail and crank up the detail, you could even spread out those dirt even better. Same here. For the second one, I'm going to do the same thing. I think the detail here could be cranked up slightly. And for the scale, I'm going to bring it back down to 100. It takes a lot of tweaking, guys, so you might not like it at the beginning, but go ahead and play around with all of these properties, the scale, distortion. All right, play around with all of those to get exactly what you need. And I want you guys to also zoom in so that you could see. Sometimes you might need to look from far away, sometimes you might need to look up close. All right, and maybe could go back here, and maybe the detail for this one is too much. I'm gonna set this to 6. All right, something like that. Okay, now last but not least, to make this more realistic, is we could go ahead and add a bumpiness to this, right? So I think I'm gonna think about the color that it's dominating the helmet the most, and that's where you could start out adding the bump so you could see what you're working with better. So I think it's gonna be the brownish part, which is, yeah, the second principal BSDF. This is where I'm gonna add the bump. I might add it on the first one too, but let's see, and add it first on the one where you see most of the color, which is the brown area here. I'm gonna add a noise texture for this one. I could just go ahead and duplicate this noise texture, Shift D. And since we're gonna be using this as a bump, the bump, which is gonna work as a height map for our mesh, for our material here, this has to be black and white. It has to be grayscale. So we could just go ahead and set this to black. This to black. And then this here, set this to white. All right, so black and white. And then we need to go ahead and Shift A and add a bump node. Plug in the color ramp onto the height and the normal onto the normal here. Okay, and once we do that, we could go ahead and take a look at what we have here. Once again, we could mess around with our noise texture that is attaching to the color ramp. So I'm gonna go back, maybe for the distortion, we don't need to blur it out since it is a bump. I'm gonna set it to 0. All right, and it's a little too much, the bumpiness. So we could bring down the strength. Maybe I could set it to 0.1. All right, 0.1, we don't really see much of the, we do see the bumpiness here though. You could see if I kind of zoom in here, you could see the bumpiness. If I let it render, you could see more of the noisy bumpiness here, which is giving it that nice iron-like feel, which is exactly what I'm going for. And I think that I could crank up the scale to maybe 150 to make it smaller, the roughness here for the bump. All right, and I think that's definitely looking better. If we go ahead and look, that gives more of that realistic feel, I think. We could go ahead and crank up the strength to maybe 0.3. All right, that's beautiful. You can see, definitely see more of it on the wings. You see, gives that nice breakup to our metallic feel. But I think it's a little bit too much of stone-like. So maybe I could set it to a lower value. Maybe set it to 0.2. All right, something like that. Yeah, this is nice. This is exactly what I'm looking for. Let me see. Full render here. Now what I could do is I could maybe mess around with the lighting. I'm gonna go to the light here on the right side. Yeah, maybe crank up the lighting slightly. Maybe set it to 15. So that gives it more of that highlight to the helmet. So that's one way to add highlight, or you could go back to the material and crank up the specularity. But I think I just needed a little bit more shine to this. Now to make this even much more realistic, we could add an HDRI image in the background. I'm going to go back to solid shading. Let's go and bring our shader editor back here, and let's set this to world. Press dot on your numpad to zoom in to the nodes, to the background node onto the world output here. Now make sure that you go to edit, preferences, and just make sure you turn on node Wrangler. You need to have that turned on so that when you go and select the background node here and you press Ctrl T, T as in Tommy, Ctrl T, you're going to be able to easily create the environment node setup here, where you could open up and apply your HDRI image here on the environment texture. Now, I want you guys to go to polyhaven.com and just go to the HDRI section here, browse for some HDRI images, high dynamic range images here, and find what you like. Let's say you like this here, just go ahead and download, click on the download button here and download the HDRI. And then once you have it downloaded, which you want, you just plug it in here on the environment texture. I'm going to click on open, and I already know the HDRI that I want, which is going to be the blue grotto. If you want to grab the same one that I have, yeah, just type that in Polyhaven. You could grab the same one. But I suggest you download a few of them to see which one you would like best. But yeah, I already know what I want. I'm going to double click here. And if I go ahead and render this out and see what we're working with, you see how much more realistic this is looking like? Yeah, let me show you before and after. So without it, this is just how it looks like. But after adding the HDRI images, the image, this is much more believable. Very nice. Now, if you don't want to show the actual environment of the HDRI that you downloaded, there's a way, work a way around that. Just go to your background node here, Shift D to duplicate that. And we are going to create a mix shader, Shift A, and type in mix shader. Plug that in here, and then plug in that new background onto the shader. And now it doesn't do anything because it's just kind of blending in these two. What we need to do is we need to add a light path node, Shift A, and go ahead and type in light path. And then plug in is camera ray onto the FAC. Alright, so now whatever background that you have on this second shader here, whatever background color you have here, it will show up here as the background color. But at the same time, it's still taking into account the HDRI image. It's still using the HDRI image that you have connected onto the environment texture, which is really nice. So if I go to the background here, let's say I change the color to, let's say green, you see that it really doesn't affect the HDRI image. The HDRI is still influencing our metal, which is good because we have full control of exactly what we want for our image here. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and make this maybe into, I don't want white, so maybe I want it to be more like a, maybe dark gray color. Yeah, dark gray color like this. And yeah, so just let it fully render here. All right, looking at this here, it looks like after adding the HDRI image, I have lost some of the dark outline that's been created by the pointiness node, by the geometry node. So in order to fix that, we could go back to our shader editor here. All right, so we have our geometry node here connected to our mix shader FAC, and then we have our principal BSDF, our first principal BSDF and our second principal BSDF all combined in mix shader. So what we can do is we can create another mix shader. Put it right here in between the current mix shader and the material output. And we could duplicate our geometry node along with our color ramp. Shift D to make a copy of that. Plug this in onto the FAC. And then we could make a copy of one of our principal BSDF shader and plug that in right here. And make sure the base color is black. And we could go ahead and check out what we have here. I'm going to go and render this out. Alright, so we see more of the darker tones, but I think we could mess around with our color ramp. I think I'm gonna switch this. So this is gonna be white right here. And this one's gonna be black right there. So just kind of switch up the location of this, and I'm gonna go ahead and bring them closer to each other. So now you could see more of the darker tones as what we had before previously. So you see the dark effect that's outlining the depth of the mesh. So we see that more. And I think I could even add, let me see here. Let me see if I could make it even, more noticeable like that. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's a lot more noticeable. And I think I want to add a noise texture on the principal BSDF here. So I'm going to go ahead and Shift A, noise texture, and create a color ramp. And plug this in onto the FAC. And okay, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and move this, reorganize this. Okay, so I'm gonna plug in the color onto the FAC and color onto the base color here. And I'm gonna go ahead and mess around with the noise texture. Okay, so I'm gonna actually, going back to the color ramp, we need to make sure we bring these sliders close together so we could actually see the noise. All right. Yeah, you could see that more. All right, so something like that I think would be great. And could go ahead and mess around with the roughness, maybe add just a tad bit of roughness here and crank up the detail slightly. Crank up the roughness a little bit. All right, so that would also break up the coloring. And let me see, do a quick full render here. All right, yeah, so we could see more of the outline now. And yeah, we could see it here, very nice. Okay guys, so I hope that you have learned a lot from this. And here I show you how to create a realistic metal. If you guys want to go ahead and add some custom scratches, you want to maybe sculpt this, and what you could do is unwrap this and then add some custom scratches wherever you want it. And what you could do is you could create a normal map out of your custom sculpt and go ahead and plug it in onto the normal map section. You could create a mix shader and go ahead and plug it in, a brand new normal map on there. So that is if you want some scratches and just some damages on the helmet here. But yeah, this is how you create a realistic metal material. And I hope that you guys have learned a lot from this. And I will see you guys in the next future Victory 3D YouTube videos.